Picture this. It's 2 in the morning. The building is completely empty, except for you. The fluorescent lights above your head are humming at a frequency that somehow feels wrong. Your coworkers left hours ago. Your phone has 1 bar of signal. And somewhere down the hall, you just heard something move. This is the reality for millions of people who work the night shift every single week. Security guards, nurses, factory workers, gas station attendants, hotel staff. People who clock in when the rest of the world is clocking out. And while most nights pass without incident, some nights leave marks on people that never fully heal. Today, I have 11 hours worth of the most disturbing, unsettling, and genuinely terrifying stories collected from real night shift workers. People who have agreed to share what happened to them during those long, dark hours between midnight and dawn. Some of these stories have rational explanations. Some of them absolutely do not. And a few of them are going to make you think twice the next time someone you love tells you they work nights. We are going to be here for a while, so get comfortable. Make sure your lights are on, and if you are currently on a night shift right now listening to this, I genuinely apologize for what I am about to put you through. Let us start with hour 1. The first story comes from a security guard we're going to call Marcus. Marcus worked overnight security at a large commercial warehouse in the Midwest for about 3 years. He described it as one of the most boring jobs a person could have, which is exactly why what happened during his 14th month there caught him so completely off guard. Marcus would do his rounds every hour on the hour, walk the perimeter, check the loading docks, verify the locks on the main storage areas, sign the clipboard, and go back to his booth. He said he had done it so many times that he could practically sleepwalk through the whole thing. And on this particular Tuesday night in November, that routine familiarity is what made everything feel so deeply wrong. He was halfway through his second round of the night, somewhere around 1:15 in the morning, when he noticed that the door to storage bay 4 was slightly ajar.
Control, this is Mark.
Not open, not broken,
I'm checking it out
just
now.
cracked, maybe an inch. He had checked it on his first round, and it had been fully locked. He was certain of it because the padlock on that bay had a habit of sticking, and he always had to jiggle it twice. He remembered jiggling it twice. Marcus radioed in to the monitoring station and let them know he was going to investigate. He pushed the door open slowly and swept his flashlight across the interior. Nothing seemed disturbed. The shelving units were fully stocked with industrial equipment. Everything appeared to be exactly where it should be. He walked the full length of the bay, checked behind every row of shelving, and found nothing. He chalked it up to human error on his first round. Maybe he had not secured the padlock as well as he thought. He locked it again, gave it 3 jigs this time just to be safe, and continued his rounds. On his third round, the door was open again. Same amount, same inch-wide crack, same padlock, which was now hanging open. Marcus felt his body go cold. He was the only person in the building. He had the only set of keys. The monitoring station confirmed that no access codes had been used on any entry point. He called his supervisor. His supervisor arrived 40 minutes later, and together they did a full sweep of the building. What they found in storage bay 4 was a sleeping bag shoved behind the last row of shelving, pressed against the back wall. Inside the sleeping bag was a set of clothes, 3 empty water bottles, and a collection of handwritten notes. The notes were written in a language neither of them recognized. They were not threatening, they were not violent, but they were arranged in a very deliberate pattern, almost like someone had been documenting something, keeping a record of some kind. Whoever had been living in that warehouse was gone, but based on the condition of the space, the worn path and the dust along the floor, the way the sleeping bag was thoroughly compressed and shaped to a human body, they had been there for a very long time, possibly months. The truly disturbing part came later, when the building manager reviewed the security camera footage. Every single camera in and around Storage Bay 4 had experienced what the technician described as a localized recording failure during the hours between midnight and 4 a.m., going back for the past several months. Not the whole system, just those specific cameras during those specific hours. Marcus quit 2 weeks later. Hour 2 brings us to a story from a woman named Della, who worked the overnight shift at a residential care facility for elderly patients with memory-related conditions. Della was a licensed practical nurse with several years of experience, and she described herself as someone who was not easily frightened and who had seen more than her share of difficult situations in her career. The facility she worked at housed about 40 residents across 2 wings. The night shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and typically only 3 or 4 staff members were on at any given time. Della said that by nature of the population they served, unusual behavior in the night hours was fairly common. Residents with dementia often experienced what is clinically called sundowning, a phenomenon where symptoms of confusion and agitation intensify during the evening and nighttime hours. So Della was experienced in navigating those situations. What she was not prepared for was the night she found every single resident in the memory care wing standing silently in the hallway. All 22 of them, still, quiet, all facing the same direction. Della had come out of the nursing station to do her routine check and turned the corner into the wing to find them all there in the low amber glow of the nighttime corridor lighting. No one was speaking, no one was moving. They were all oriented toward the far end of the hall, where a large window looked out onto the facility's garden. It was 3:20 in the morning. She described the sound as the worst part, or rather the absence of sound. 22 people, many of whom could not remain quiet for more than a few minutes under normal circumstances, all completely silent. She called out to the closest resident, a woman in her 80s she knew well. The woman turned her head slowly toward Della and said very clearly and quietly, "She says it is almost time," then turned back toward the window. Della got her colleagues. The 4 of them gently guided each resident back to their rooms over the next 30 minutes. None of the residents seemed distressed. None of them had any recollection of it the next morning when asked. The incident was documented in the facility log as a group behavioral event, which Della said was the most inadequate description of anything she had ever experienced in her professional life. She stayed at that job for another year. The event never repeated, but she told us that she never once turned that corner again at night without her heart climbing into her throat first. Let us move into hour 3, which is where the stories start getting a bit more explicitly frightening. This one was submitted by a man named Trevor, who worked overnight stocking at a large grocery store chain. He had been at the same location for about a year and a half and described the overnight crew as a tight-knit group, usually 5 or 6 people working together through the night, restocking shelves after the store closed at midnight. Trevor said the store had a section in the far back corner that the staff referred to informally as the dead zone. Not because anything had happened there, just because it was the furthest point from the break room and the loading dock. It had poor lighting that the manager had been meaning to fix for months, and it was generally considered the least desirable part of the shift to work on. Trevor pulled that assignment on a rotating basis like everyone else. On the night in question, he was working in the dead zone alone, restocking the dried goods aisle around 2:30 a.m. The rest of the crew was spread across the other sections of the store. The ambient noise of the building, the refrigeration unit cycling, the floor buffer running somewhere toward the front, the occasional creak of the structure, was all normal background that Trevor said he had long since stopped consciously registering. He heard footsteps behind him. Clear, deliberate, unhurried footsteps walking down the aisle toward him. He assumed it was one of his coworkers and did not immediately turn around. The footsteps stopped right behind him, extremely close. He could feel the presence of someone there. He turned around. The aisle was empty. Trevor stood there for a moment, genuinely confused, not yet afraid. He walked to the end of the aisle and looked in both directions. The store was quiet. He could see two of his coworkers at the far end of the store, but neither of them was anywhere near his section, and neither had the right body language of someone who had just been running. He went back to work. 15 minutes later, the footsteps came again. Same thing. Clear, deliberate, stopping just behind him. He spun around fast this time. Empty aisle. Trevor went to get a coworker. They both stood in the dead zone for several minutes, and nothing happened. His coworker laughed it off and went back to their section. Trevor reluctantly returned to work. The third time the footsteps came, they did not stop. They kept walking, right past him. He felt a displacement of air, a change in the atmosphere next to him, as whatever was generating those footsteps continued down the aisle and around the corner. He heard them fade, and then silence. Trevor finished his shift. He requested a different section assignment after that night, and was never asked to explain why. He said the strangest part looking back was that the footsteps had a weight to them, a heaviness, like something substantial making its way down a grocery store aisle at 2:30 in the morning.
Hour 4. We are hearing from a woman who asked to be identified only as Kay. She worked overnight at a call center for a telecommunications company. Large, open-plan office, several hundred workstations. But the overnight skeleton crew was usually just 6 to 12 people spread across the enormous floor. Kay described it as working in a warehouse-sized room where most of the lights were off, and you existed in this little island of brightness at your desk, surrounded by darkness in every direction. Kay had worked there for about 8 months when she started noticing that someone was using the workstations in the dark section of the floor during her shift. She only realized it because she could see, from her seat, the faint glow of a monitor screen somewhere deep in the unlit portion of the office. At first, she assumed it was a screen that had simply not been properly shut down from the day shift. Screens left on, not turned off fully, just sleeping. It happened all the time. But then, the glow started moving. Not dramatically, just gradually shifting position across what must have been 3 or 4 different workstations over the course of several nights. Kay mentioned it to a supervisor, who told her she was probably just seeing reflections from the city lights coming through the windows. She accepted that explanation for about a week. The night she stopped accepting it was a Tuesday. She was on a slow call, the kind of mindless troubleshooting conversation that barely required conscious thought, when she happened to look up and count the glow points in the dark section of the floor. 3 of them, dim but unmistakable. 3 screens lit up in the unlit section of the office. And as she watched, she saw the silhouette of a person sitting at one of them. Kay put her call on hold, stood up, and walked toward the dark section. She made it about halfway before all 3 screens went dark simultaneously. She went back to her desk and pulled up the building access log, a feature all employees had access to. According to the system, no one had badged into the building for the past 4 hours, except the current overnight staff. Whoever was in the dark section of that floor had either been there before anyone arrived for the shift, or they had found another way in. Kay never went into that section alone again. She transferred to a day shift position 3 months later. We're into hour 5 now, and this story comes from a paramedic. We will call him Owen. Owen had been working overnight EMS shifts for about 6 years when this occurred. He was no stranger to the darkness of emergency work, and he told us up front that he was a deeply pragmatic person who generally preferred logical explanations. What he experienced, he said, does not have one that satisfies him. Owen and his partner were responding to a wellness check at a residential address around 4 a.m. Dispatch had received an automated medical alert from the address. When they arrived, they found an elderly man who had fallen and was in need of medical assistance. Standard situation. They stabilized him, got him onto the stretcher, and were preparing to transport him. As Owen was loading equipment back into the ambulance, he noticed a woman standing at the end of the driveway, watching them. She was older, dressed in what he described as very nice clothes for 4 in the morning. A dark blouse, pressed trousers. She had a calm expression and was watching the operation with what Owen interpreted as concern rather than alarm.
What woman?
Owen assumed she was a neighbor
and gave her a nod to indicate everything was under control. She did not nod back. She kept watching. His partner came out of the house, and Owen asked if they should speak to the woman at the end of the drive. His partner looked directly at the spot Owen was pointing to and said, "What woman?" Owen turned back. The driveway was empty. No footsteps in the gravel, no sound of movement, no figure retreating into the darkness. She was simply gone, from a spot where a person could not have moved that quickly without making noise. Later, at the hospital, while the elderly man was being seen to, Owen happened to mention the woman to one of the intake nurses, who recognized the address. The nurse mentioned, as casually as one mentions the weather, that the man's wife had passed away at that same address about 18 months prior. The photograph at the nurse's station showed an older woman, dark blouse, pressed trousers. Owen told us he does not believe in ghosts, but he also told us he has never fully resolved what he saw at the end of that driveway.
Hour 6. A factory worker. A man named Joel who worked overnight at a metal fabrication plant. Industrial setting, enormous machines, extremely loud when running, extremely silent when they were not. Joel worked a 4-night week and had been at the plant for about 2 years. The plant had an area in the back building, separate from the main production floor, called the Old Wing. It was technically still in use, but only for storage of older equipment and raw material overflow. The machinery in the Old Wing had not been operational for years. Joel said you could tell the difference just by the smell. The main floor had the alive smell of metal and oil and heat. The Old Wing smelled like something that had been sleeping for a long time. Joel was sent to retrieve a specific piece of equipment from the Old Wing one night around 1 a.m. He grabbed his flashlight and made his way through the connecting corridor. He found what he was looking for quickly enough and was heading back out when he heard the sound of one of the old machines powering up. Not all the way, not operational, but the deep, resonant hum of something large receiving electricity and beginning to wake up. He swept his light around the wing. Everything looked as it always did, dark, dusty, still. He checked the machine he thought was making the noise. It was not connected to anything. The power cabling had been removed at some point in the past. It was not receiving electricity from any source that Joel could identify. But the hum was real. He could feel it in his chest. Joel left quickly. He told the shift supervisor what he had heard. The shift supervisor went to investigate with Joel. When they entered the Old Wing together, there was no sound at all, just silence and dust. The supervisor ran an inspection of the power infrastructure in that section of the building and confirmed that no electrical current had been running to any of the old machines. There was no explanation for what Joel had heard and felt.
3 weeks later, the plant announced it was beginning a full renovation of the Old Wing. During the demolition work, the construction crew found evidence within the walls of the Old Wing of a significant fire that had apparently occurred decades before the current company had occupied the building. A fire that historical records later confirmed had killed 2 workers who had been trapped in that section of the plant. Their names were in a local newspaper archive from the period. It was the first anyone at the current company had known about it. Joel left the plant shortly after. Hour 7 shifts the tone slightly. This story is more about sustained dread than a single incident, and it comes from a woman named Priya, who managed overnight operations at a small boutique hotel. 12 rooms, historic building, the kind of place where the floorboards had their own vocabulary and the radiators had opinions. Priya worked alone on the overnight desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. She described most nights as quiet and manageable. She had her routine, her paperwork, her podcasts through an earpiece, her cup of tea. She was comfortable there. The discomfort began when she started receiving internal calls from room 7. For those unfamiliar with how hotel phone systems work, internal calls from a guest room show up on the front desk display as the room number. Room 7 was registering on her system as calling her several times a night. She would pick up, and there would be nothing on the line.
Not breathing, not static, just an open connection that lasted about 15 seconds and then disconnected. She checked with the system provider. The phone in room 7 was functioning correctly. She checked the room itself. Empty, properly made, no guest registered, everything normal. The calls continued for 3 weeks, always between midnight and 4 a.m., always room 7, always the same open connection, the same 15 seconds, the same disconnection. Priya started keeping a log because she felt that if she documented it, it would feel more like a solvable problem and less like something she had no framework for. On the 21st day of logging, she had a guest check into room 7, a business traveler, perfectly ordinary, no particular significance. The calls from room 7 stopped completely that night. They resumed the night the guest checked out 2 days later.
Priya came to understand over the following months that the calls only ever happened when room 7 was empty. When the room had a guest, the calls stopped entirely. When the room was vacant, they started again. She never found a technical explanation. She never found a historical reason for it. She just learned to live with it, in the way that people who work nights often learn to live with things they cannot explain, because the alternative is to quit. And she needed the job.
That sedan hasn't moved in 11 hours.
Hour
no
8.
Unit access log for
Back to something more explicitly threatening. This one comes from a man named Andre, who worked overnight at a self-storage facility. His job was simple: monitor the cameras, do rounds of the facility, assist any late customers with access if needed. The facility was open to registered customers around the clock, which meant people came and went at all hours for entirely legitimate reasons. Andre was about 6 months into the job when he noticed a car that had been parked in the facility for 11 hours. Same spot, near the back of the lot, engine off. He could not see inside due to the angle and the darkness. He checked the access records, and no unit associated with that section of the lot had been opened during the time the car was present. Whoever was in that car, if anyone was in it at all, was not using a storage unit. Andre approached the car on his round. He described the feeling of walking across that dark parking lot toward a car that had been sitting there motionless for 11 hours as one of the most quietly terrifying experiences of his life. He had his radio. He had his flashlight. He was following protocol. He knocked on the window. Nothing. He shone his light inside. The car appeared empty. He ran the plate and found it was registered to a man whose name meant nothing to him. He logged it and returned to the office. The next night, the same car was back, same spot, same motionless stillness. This time, Andre called the police to do a welfare check. 2 officers arrived, ran the plate, and attempted to locate the registered owner. The owner turned out to be a man who had died 4 months prior. The car, which had been part of his estate, was supposedly in the possession of a family member. Nobody was ever in the car when it was checked. Nobody could explain how it was getting into the locked facility, as the gate required a registered access code. The code associated with the deceased owner's account had never been deactivated. Someone had been using it. The family member was contacted. They were completely unaware that anyone had the access code and denied using the storage unit or the facility. They collected the car the following week. It never returned. But Andre spent considerable time afterward wondering who had been sitting in that car in the middle of the night at a storage facility using a dead man's access code and parking without ever going near a storage unit. Hour 9 is the one that personally affects me the most, probably because it involves a child. This story comes from a nurse we will call Grace, who worked overnight in the pediatric ward of a regional hospital. Grace had more than a decade of experience in pediatric care, and she was, by her own description, completely accustomed to the specific emotional weight of that environment. The ward she worked on had a family waiting area down the hall from the patient rooms. It was a small, soft-lit space with chairs and a play corner for siblings, who sometimes stayed overnight while a brother or sister was being treated. Grace walked past it on her rounds regularly.
One night, somewhere around 3 a.m., she was doing her rounds and looked into the family waiting area as she passed. There was a small child sitting in the play
Hey
corner.
there, sweetie. Are you
A girl,
lost?
maybe 5 or 6 years old, in a nightgown, sitting very still on the floor with her back to the doorway. Grace stopped. There were no siblings registered as staying in the ward that night. No family members had been checked into the waiting area. Grace went to the doorway and spoke gently to the child. No response. She stepped inside the room and approached. The girl was holding something in her lap. Grace got within a few feet of her, and the girl began to turn her head slowly. Grace does not fully describe what happened next. She told us only that she saw the child's face and that she immediately left the room and went to the nurse's station and did not go back to the waiting area alone for the remainder of that shift. When she and a colleague went back together to check, the room was empty. Nothing was disturbed. Grace wrote it off publicly as fatigue and a trick of the light because she was a practical person and that explanation was available to her. But she told us privately that she did not believe it and that the child she saw was not a living child. She has never been able to articulate exactly why she was certain of that. She just was. She worked on that ward for 2 more years and never saw the child again. Hour 10. We are getting close to the end now, but we are going to give this next story the full weight it deserves because it is among the most disturbing accounts we received. This one comes from a man named Shane, who worked overnight at a large sorting facility for a major logistics company. Thousands of packages moving through the building every night, massive conveyor systems, organized chaos. Shane had been there 4 years. The facility had a section referred to by staff as the dead letter room. In postal and logistics terminology, a dead letter is something that cannot be delivered and cannot be returned. Items whose addresses are unreadable or incorrect, packages with no return information, things that have fallen into a kind of administrative limbo. Most large logistics operations have a space like this. Shane worked near the dead letter room, and over 4 years developed a habit of glancing at the window and the door as he passed, a small habit with no particular purpose. The room was full of shelved packages, always growing, rarely diminishing. Nothing remarkable.
3 years into his job, a new supervisor reorganized the overnight assignments, and Shane began spending more time in the area of the dead letter room. He started to notice that certain packages on the shelves appeared to have been moved between shifts. Not all of them, just some. Specific ones that he found himself unconsciously tracking because of their position relative to landmarks on the shelves. He brought this up with coworkers, who largely dismissed it as his imagination, or as the result of vibrations from the machinery causing minor shifts in the package positions over time. Reasonable enough explanation. But then the packages started appearing outside the room, in the corridor, one at a time, never more than one on any given night, always in the same spot, about 10 feet from the dead letter room door, as if they had been placed there deliberately. Each one was undeliverable. Each one had no return address. The facility had cameras everywhere, but the corridor outside the dead letter room was in a blind spot between 2 camera angles. Nobody could explain how the packages were getting into the corridor. The room was kept locked, and Shane was not aware of anyone else having a key besides the supervisor. Shane's supervisor eventually had a locksmith re-key the room and increase camera coverage to eliminate the blind spot. After the cameras were repositioned, the packages stopped appearing in the corridor.
But the new footage, reviewed during a security audit several weeks later, showed something that the logistics company's security team declined to explain in any documentation Shane was ever given access to. Shane only found out about it secondhand, through a colleague who had seen the footage before it was apparently archived and restricted. What the footage showed, according to that colleague, was the corridor completely empty. And then, at a consistent time each night, between 3 and 4 a.m., a package appearing in the corridor, without any visible mechanism. No door opening, no person placing it, no conveyor system delivering it. Simply not there, and then there. Shane still works in logistics,
He never
but he
takes
has
anything,
never
only
again
leaves
worked a
something.
facility with a dead letter room. We are in the final hour now,
hour 11, and I want to end this collection with a story that does not involve a ghost, a strange sound, or an unexplained figure. I want to end with a story that is frightening because it is entirely human. This story comes from a woman named Carmen, who worked overnight security at a large parking structure attached to an office complex. 12 floors, capacity for around 2,000 vehicles, mostly empty by midnight on weekdays. Carmen worked solo on the overnight desk, with access to the full camera system. About a year into the job, she started noticing a pattern in the camera footage. One car, a dark-colored sedan. It would enter the structure every Thursday night between 1 and 2 a.m., drive to the 8th floor, park in the same spot in the far corner, remain there for between 45 minutes and 2 hours, and then leave. Week after week, same car, same floor, same corner, same window of time.
Carmen was
Same door
thorough,
every night,
and she was
always alone.
curious. She logged the plate and cross-referenced it with the permit system. The plate was not registered to any permit holder for the building. The car had no legitimate business being in the structure. She reviewed footage more carefully over several weeks. The car always arrived alone. It always parked facing the wall in the corner. It was always dark when it arrived and dark when it left. She never saw the driver on any camera clearly enough to make out identifying features. On a Thursday night, approximately 3 weeks into her investigation, she called the police non-emergency line and explained what she had observed. An officer came to the structure and waited with Carmen. The sedan arrived at 1:17 a.m., as if keeping an appointment. The officer went to the 8th floor. When the officer reached the 8th floor and approached the vehicle with his lights, the driver fled. The sedan sped through the structure, down the exit ramp, and out into the city. The officer called it in. The vehicle was found abandoned 3 miles away. When investigators searched it, they found materials inside that Carmen was later told confirmed the vehicle's occupant had been engaged in surveillance of several specific individuals who worked in the office complex attached to the structure. Who those individuals were and what the surveillance was for was never shared with Carmen. But the investigator she spoke to told her she had done exactly the right thing by noticing the pattern and documenting it. And that is what makes this story linger in a different way than the others. Because there was no ghost here, no unexplained phenomenon, just a human being using the cover of night and the assumption that nobody is watching to do something that required investigation by law enforcement. The darkness gave them cover. A night shift worker took that cover away.
That is what night shift workers do more often than we acknowledge. They hold the line during the hours when the rest of us are asleep and trusting that someone is paying attention. They see things. They hear things. They experience things that no amount of preparation or training fully equips them for. And they come back the next shift
It wasn't on the camera,
and do it again.
but I saw it move.
The 11 stories you have heard tonight, this morning, whenever you were listening, span factories and hospitals and hotels and parking structures and warehouses and grocery stores. Different industries, different people,
They come back
different circumstances,
the next shift
but they
and
share
do it
a
again.
common thread. Something happened during those dark hours that changed the person who was there for it. Some of them quit. Some of them stayed. All of them carry it. And all of them, every single one, told us that what they experienced was real, that it happened, that the night is not simply an extension of the day with the lights turned off. It is its own territory, with its own rules, and its own population of things that move through it. If you work nights, you already know this. If you have never worked nights, I hope this gives you even a fraction of the appreciation that these people deserve. And the next time someone you know comes home from a night shift with that specific look in their eyes, the one that says something happened but they are not sure how to talk about it, sit with them for a while. Make them a cup of something warm and let them tell you. Because the night has been holding their stories long enough. If this collection kept you up, kept you company, or gave you genuine chills, hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed because we go deep on exactly this kind of content regularly.
If you have your own night shift experience you want to share, the comments are open, and I read every single one. There is a playlist linked at the end of this video with more collections like this one if you need something to fill the remaining hours before sunrise. Stay safe out there. And for anyone currently on shift right now, you are not alone, even when it feels like you might be.
The end.